Good afternoon, my name is Elian Alkari. Today I'll be exploring the influence of neural mechanisms on mental health, psychological behavior, and the personal growth of the American youth. Starting off today, we'll be having the relevance to our society. Why is this so relevant to our society? The relationships I've discovered, the question researched, my solutions and limitations, and then finally my conclusion. So I used two sources this year, and I had the predator-induced fear, which I will get into later because that was one of mine, and the Simone Biles in the most human meaning of courage. And to start off with Simone Biles, pretty much she is a professional gymnast in the Team USA for the Olympics, and in 2021 she decided to withdraw because she felt that she just doesn't trust herself as much as she used to, and she never felt like this before, as Thomas II, a columnist from The Athletic, describes. And this is a prime example of the relationship I've discovered, how the neural mechanisms that create mental health, depending on if it's negative or positive, and how that creates a certain negative or positive psychological behavior and personal growth. And what does this matter? Why does this matter to us? And why is this so relevant to us? Because once we learn how to alternate our neural mechanisms and have positive mental health, we'll be able to succeed more and have a great personal growth in the American youth. So, as Malinowski describes, a researcher at Liverpool John Moores University, there are four main neural mechanisms that affect the mental health, and those are adrenaline, brain structures, serotonin, and adapted senses. And this begs the question, to what extent do neural mechanisms that underlie mental health influence the psychological behavior and personal growth of the American youth? And what is mental health? Well, I found that this is the relationship that I think is what causes psychological behavior and personal growth. Neural mechanisms underlie mental health. So if you have a positive mental health, which I will get into later, you will have a positive outcome. So starting off with psychological behavior, Zenet did a chickadee study which explained how it affected behavior by the alteration of the amygdala and cortex, which are neural mechanisms. And pretty much what happened to these chickadees were they were put under a predator-induced fear environment. So they began to adapt these senses and change their neural mechanisms, and we were able to understand how that affected their psychological behavior and personal growth. Furthermore, Legge, a MMT at Columbia University, describes how deferring brain functions by music affects the psychological behavior, and that's because he studied a music mediation emotion study and how it worked where different individuals were put under different types of music, and those changing neural mechanisms, which were developed through MRI, were able to be seen to see how the outcome was like. Furthermore, personal growth, Mahani, he did a sensory evaluation study, and he's a sensory researcher and he's world-renowned. He studied that how mental health was a result of adapted senses, which leads to a changed personal growth rate. And this can be seen that since the adapted senses, they were put under different environments, and saw how those with different adapted environments were people with more adaptations were able to understand that they had a greater positive outcome through a positive mental health, leading to a positive personal growth. Furthermore, Wiegold, a researcher at the University of Akron, examined the relationship between PGI distress score and the psychological well-being. And we were able to find that PGI was conducting a 61% of mental health conditions, which is underlying and lowering the rate of personal growth of an individual's experience. As we can tell, if someone were to have lower rates of and negative rates of adrenaline and serotonin, as well as different brain structures, they're going to end up having and causing mental health issues. Furthermore, if someone were to have positive and hardworking, such as having high adrenaline, high serotonin, and having more adapted senses to their environment, they're going to become more successful in the future. And so this raises another question. What can we do to positively impact our neural mechanisms? And one of the first alternate solutions I created was addressing mental health issues in the American youth. And this is through psychotherapy, pharmacotherapy, and intervention programs. And for example, solution is valid when treating the chickadee treatment, because if they were to have addressed the mental health issues and not being put under those predator-induced environments, then they're not going to have that negative outcome. Furthermore, Lopez, a researcher at Rice University, describes how mental health issues for emotion regulating training can be also a valid solution to this outcome. And the limitations are that there's financial barriers. Some people don't have that access to the money to be put under these intervention programs. Furthermore, there's the consideration of socio-cultural factors. Some people have cultural backgrounds where they're not quite allowed to have these solutions. And furthermore, there's new recent methodologies of research in the medical field that can change this solution to be more suitable for the environment. So furthermore, we have how the limitations create a worsened mental health and leading to a negative behavior. Therefore, I conclude that the preferred solution is that strategies to promote positive mental health and well-being among the American youth, such as mindfulness peer groups and peer support groups, as well as school-based mental health initiatives. This is proved valid in almost every situation you have where if someone has a mental health issue, they end up having a positive outcome because of the peer support groups and being put together in this environment. Furthermore, Cacciopo, the researcher at Johns Hopkins University, shows how this impacting with the mental health issues and PTSD will create a positive outcome. Although this is my current solution, there is also limitations, which not as much as the other, there's slight limitations. It's consideration of sociocultural factors. Again, some people will decide not to follow these solutions. And also, the new coming of research. Every day we are developing new examples and researches that can create better solutions. And that is it for today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Elliot. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions now, okay? What evidence did you gather during your research that you chose not to include, and why did you choose not to include it?
So my research was basically focused on the American youth, and a lot of different researchers out there have found things on cattle, how muscle contractions, and a specific one I didn't use was Steiner's cattle one, where the neural mechanisms in cattle, but that wouldn't have fit in my American youth one, so I didn't even use it. And another one were different examples of athletes, and that wouldn't have fit because I was focusing on not professional athletes, although Simone Biles was in mine. I was looking for 12 to 18-year-old American youths.
Okay, thank you so much. And one more question, okay? What are the implications of your findings to your community?
Yeah, so the implication finding to my community is that although we have these positive outcomes and we can alter the positive neural mechanisms, this might lead to overwork, stress, and that will lead to negative mental health. So although I have this relationship going and you can see the discoveries, but we're not all perfect, and it's not like we can keep going in this positive trajectory. Instead, we're gonna burn out eventually. So that is an implication to my community.
Thank you so much.